Treat the Fugaku like a conventional IEM, and it starts to look almost unreasonable. It's expensive. It runs on a dedicated amplifier. It uses a proprietary 7-pin cable that no third-party manufacturer makes. And it asks you to handle an in-ear system with the same seriousness you would give a high-end component stack. That is the design brief. Brise Audio isn't trying to build a flexible passive earphone. The Fugaku is a closed active system. Amplifier, crossover, cable, and earphone treated as one circuit. The idea is simple, but unforgiving. Control the amplifier, crossover, cable routing, and driver loading as one architecture, and you remove many of the variables passive earphones inherit from source matching, cable rolling, and internal passive filters. That also means Fugaku should not be judged by the usual checklist. The closed architecture has to give back enough control to justify everything it takes away. Fugaku is extreme. That part is not in dispute. What matters is whether the extremity has engineering discipline behind it. With Fugaku, that discipline is not decorative. It is built into the signal path. The fundamental break from conventional earphone design comes at the crossover. In a conventional high-end earphone, the signal leaves your amplifier, travels through the cable, and hits a passive crossover inside the shell, dividing frequency bands after amplification. That works, and the best passive earphones can sound extraordinary. But the amplifier is not driving each driver band directly and independently. The system is still negotiating with the passive network, the cable, the source impedance, and driver behavior after the fact. Fugaku reverses that sequence. Frequency splitting happens inside the dedicated amplifier, before the signal ever reaches the earphone. Each driver band gets its own separately amplified signal, routed through a proprietary 7-pin pure silver interface. That cable isn't an accessory, it's part of the circuit. A standard 2-pin or MMCX cable can't carry multiple independently amplified frequency bands, which is why cable rolling simply isn't part of the Fugaku equation. You accept the system as Brise Audio built it, or you move on. It is restrictive by design. That restriction is not a flaw Brise forgot to solve. It is the operating principle. Brise is not asking the user to complete the system through matching experiments. Inside the earphone, the driver layout runs 8 drivers across 5 ways. MEMS, for speed and high-frequency behavior, balanced armatures covering their assigned bands, and dual 8mm liquid crystal polymer dynamic drivers handling the low end. The shells are titanium, and the internal geometry uses a 3D printed manifold to fix driver positions and sound guide paths. Phase discipline and transient precision do not come from driver count alone. The physical structure has to be deliberate. Here it is. The dedicated amplifier carries the same logic into the electronics. Brise uses a Tsuranagi-derived platform, but this isn't a portable amp with a specialty output jack tacked on. It incorporates active crossover behavior, a differential line receiver, precision electronic volume control, and a separated board layout, an 8-layer board for the analog amplification stage, a 4-layer board for power supply and control circuits, and 14 independently arranged linear regulated power supply lines. In a multi-amplifier system, that separation matters. When each amplifier block is responsible for a specific driver band, crosstalk, shared grounding, and poor supply behavior between stages become audible problems. Fugaku is built on the premise that small electrical interactions, the kind passive earphone designs largely ignore, become meaningful when the entire signal path is this tightly integrated. Fugaku is not chasing the normal flagship earphone argument. Most flagship earphones have to be adaptable. Fugaku takes the opposite route. It narrows the system until Brise can control more of the outcome. Sonically, this is not a warm, romantic flagship. Fugaku is about precision under control. With fast electronic music, the question is not bass quantity. It is whether sub-bass pressure smears the next transient event. A passive earphone can hit hard, but runs slightly congested when the bass driver is working at full output. The active architecture here is aimed at keeping driver bands separated, so the low end can land without dragging the upper range behind it. The goal is not bigger bass. It is bass that stops when it should. Large orchestral material exposes a different weakness: brass, strings, woodwinds, and percussion can all arrive with overlapping energy at full dynamic range. Fugaku's case is that active filtering and dedicated amplification help preserve internal structure when the mix gets dense, not by making Mahler sound larger, but by keeping the internal separation from breaking down. Scale is not the only test. Stability under pressure is the test. Quiet jazz recordings make the test smaller, not easier. Cymbal decay, piano attack, room tone, and low-level detail at modest volume. This is where the MEMS speed and low-noise amplifier design start to matter more. Fugaku isn't background audio. It wants a quiet room and an engaged listener. If the room is noisy, if the seal is inconsistent, or if the listener is half-focused, a large part of what makes the system special simply disappears. And that discipline does not stop at the circuit. It follows the owner home. Fugaku is transportable, not portable. Yes, you can move it, but it's not a subway earphone, and it's not something you drop into a bag with a phone dongle. The dedicated amplifier needs somewhere stable to sit. The cable needs to be routed with care. The listening environment needs to be quiet enough for the resolution to mean anything. In a home office, a bedroom, a hotel room, or a private evening setup, it makes complete sense. In a crowded public space, it makes almost none. The issue isn't sound quality, it's use case. Cable tension, bag movement, public handling, inconsistent seal, these are exactly the conditions this system wasn't designed for. Fit is non-negotiable. If the seal breaks down, bass weight drops, phase perception shifts, and the presentation can go thinner and brighter than Brise Audio intended. Before the amplifier or the MEMS element gets questioned, the physical interface has to be right. Tip selection, insertion depth, posture, cable route, and ambient noise all matter here. Fugaku behaves less like a luxury earphone and more like a miniature high-end system. A great component in the wrong room can sound ordinary. A serious amplifier into the wrong load can lose control. An excellent source in a noisy environment can waste its own resolution. Fugaku brings that same discipline into the in-ear category. The scale is smaller, but the setup dependency is real. The service reality is harder to ignore. With a passive earphone, a cable failure means replacing the cable. With Fugaku, the amplifier, cable, and earphone form a closed system. If the dedicated amplifier fails, there is no passive fallback. If the 7-pin cable is damaged, no aftermarket cable fills the gap. That is the price Brise Audio's architecture demands. And then there's the actual cost, roughly $17,000, May 2026. At that price, Fugaku is no longer competing with normal flagship earphones. That's asking whether a serious private listener is willing to fund an entire active acoustic ecosystem rather than a conventional flexible earphone. For the wrong listener, Fugaku is not a close call. It is an easy no. If you want cable rolling, daily commuting, casual portability, source flexibility, or a lightweight backup earphone, Fugaku answers none of those questions. Not because it lacks ambition, but because its ambition points somewhere else entirely. Fugaku becomes persuasive only when the room, the listener, and the ownership discipline are all right. If you listen in a controlled private space, care about transient precision and frequency band separation, and you're willing to manage fit, routing, charging, storage, and service logistics like a serious component owner, Fugaku becomes one of the most coherent extreme earphone systems currently on the market. Outside that use case, the score misleads. Brise Audio Fugaku earns a Sonic Core audio score of 9.9 out of 10. Not for convenience, it isn't convenient. Not for flexibility, it's deliberately inflexible. It scores that high because the engineering logic is unusually complete. Amplifier, crossover, cable, shell, driver layout, and ownership model all point in the same direction. Fugaku isn't the best earphone for everyone. It's the best argument for treating an earphone as an active high-end system.